The air was still heavy and colored by decades of quiet dust. The basement of St. Augustine looked exactly as it had the last time anyone had stood here with purpose. Concrete floor, flaked paint, a ceiling so low it felt like thought itself needed to bend. Time did not move here. It settled. In the far corner, under a thin beam of light filtered through a rusted vent, lay the outline of a small room once sealed and then forgotten. It was here, in this gloom, that the memory of a case long shelved returned to life. The investigator, now older, quieter, stepped over the threshold with the slow precision of someone who had memorized each inch of the harm hidden here. Her name had been Aurora Delisle, 27, a musician from New Orleans who arrived in San Francisco chasing a resonance her work never quite found. Her voice lingered in archival tapes, but her presence remained only in this room, in the leftover scent of cold bricks and iron dust. The investigator had seen her once alive, in the radiant gold light of a rehearsal hall. Now he saw her only in evidence photos threaded with stillness. He paused, letting the silence grow. It was not grief, not exactly, more like the recognition of a duty once mishandled. The old file rested under his arm. The edges were soft, the corners folded from transport, but inside it was sharp, precise statements, carefully labeled items, sketches of a space that had been dismissed for lack of immediate clarity. That was 1976, the year before the room had been locked, the year before Aurora had vanished. He knelt. The floor felt colder than expected, though the city above was warm, alive, indifferent. He traced the chalk outline drawn long ago, a shape meant to define her final moment. No body had been found here, but the impression of restraint remained. A silk thread, once bright coral, pressed between the planks, a recording spool left halfway through a reel, and the faint smell of dried paint like an abandoned mural. Back then, no one had wanted to believe that a woman with such distinctive presence could simply disappear. In those early weeks, posters were printed. Choir members whispered her name near candles. The investigator had interviewed the parish staff, though the statements were full of fog and polite uncertainty. The organist recalled hearing Aurora practicing late, when the church swallowed the city noise. A janitor thought he'd seen her carrying sheet music toward the basement stairs. Each detail was like a thin note, pure but incomplete. He stood again, brushing dust from his palms. His eyes adjusted to the new angle of light, catching the faint outline of something set into the wall. A frame, perhaps, hidden beneath plaster. He moved toward it with careful restraint. The sound of paper inside his file shifted, like memories realigning. Aurora Delisle, born 1949, Baton Rouge, parents teachers, studied classical piano before turning to composition, moved west in search of creative quiet. She had written of sound as if it held its own morals, its own truths. The investigator recalled a page from her journal entered into evidence. Music reveals what speech retreats from. He wondered if this room had been her retreat or her boundary. The outline he'd noticed was not a frame but a recessed cabinet sealed with layers of paint. He brushed dust aside with the sleeve of his coat. The hinges were small, an ornate, unexpected detail in a cellar meant for storage. He used a thin metal tool, pressing gently until the latch responded. A soft sigh of air escaped, old and restrained. Inside lay a box, unmarked, wooden, smooth, nearly polished. He lifted it with two hands, sensing weight beyond object's memory expectation. He set it on the floor and opened it. Inside, arranged with surprising care, were recordings, 5 reels numbered. He picked up the first, AD 6. The handwriting was clean, deliberate. He reached for his old portable player, stored for years but kept functional. The reel clicked in, and for a moment the room changed. A soft hiss filled the air, then a voice, Aurora's, not singing, speaking, quiet, measured, a little distant, as if aware the future might be listening. "I don't wish to cause worry. The sound below the choir room isn't the old pipes, it responds. Silence. Then I record to understand. He paused the reel, heart steady yet tightened. Responds. The word hung there, ambiguous but controlled. No negative terms, no agitation, just a calm report of experience. He let the reel continue. I've been granted permission to work here at night. The sanctuary is generous. I hear harmonics that aren't mine. Again, silence long enough to let dust settle on thought itself. I feel watched, but not in fear, in scrutiny. He stopped the reel. The investigator closed his eyes, counting breaths, allowing the room to return to stillness. Aurora's tone was not distressed, merely observant. Yet that observant calm was part of what made her absence decades later so persistent in memory. He set reel 1 aside and opened the second. AD 9. Another smooth click, another soft hiss. I've tried to replicate the tone from the floorboards, but it carries warmth beyond resonance. A room can hold emotion, even with no one in it. A shifting sound, perhaps the reel brushing against her sleeve as she placed the recorder down. The hidden door was unlocked when I arrived tonight. I'll note that. Someone remembers I work here. He paused, eyes fixed on the outline of that same hidden door. So someone had known. Someone had entered after she had left her last trace. But who? The file he carried bore no mention of access logs, no caretaker's notes, nothing beyond the initial interviews. He let her voice continue. The caretaker asked today if I felt safe. I answered with honesty, yes, but curious. A small laugh, distant but untroubled. Curiosity can be a comfort. The recording ended abruptly. Not a cut, not a stop, just an end. He stared at the reel as if it might clarify itself through silence. Aurora's nature, inquisitive, careful, was clear in every syllable. He returned to the cabinet. Beneath the reels there was another object, a single photograph. Aurora at the piano upstairs, sunlight caught in her hair. But next to her, barely in frame, stood another figure, not named in her file, not referenced. A man, eyes lowered, posture tense but composed. He wore robes, choir or clergy, though the photo cut him off at the collar. The investigator lifted the photo closer to the dim vent light. Aurora looked radiant, alive, full of intention. The man looked inward as if bracing for something unspoken. The back of the photo bore a date, September 2, 1976, the day before she vanished. He slid the photo into a sleeve. Dust drifted around him like quiet snow. He opened reel 3, AD 10. I found a pattern in the resonance tonight. It repeats every hour, not mechanical, not random. A pause, paper shuffling. I think someone else has been composing here, before me. Her voice carried no fear, only thought, pure and unadorned. The caretaker said the chapel basement was sealed in 1951 after renovations, yet everything here is untouched, preserved. This room was not meant to be found again. He let the reel finish. 3 down, 2 remaining. His knees ached slightly from kneeling, but he barely registered the discomfort. His gaze kept returning to the photograph. The man beside Aurora. He searched his memory. There had been a pastor in 1976, young, recently appointed, Reverend Marcus Ellery, polite, understated, known for long pauses before speech. The investigator had interviewed him once. The memory felt thin now, brittle around the edges. He set reel 4. This one began mid-sentence. Light from the vent reaches only the first beam. The rest stays quiet. I hear a chord, E minor, shifted slightly, though no instrument is present. Her breathing was audible, calm. The microphone caught the brush of her hand against a notebook. I like it here. That surprises me. He paused. That line felt heavier than the rest. Not dramatic, just precise and revealing. She had liked this room. This sealed, silent room under the church. He looked around, imagining her seated exactly where he stood. Reel 5 remained. AD final. The tape engaged with a soft click. Then her voice again. "I'm leaving these recordings in the cabinet. If someone finds them, then the room was not sealed forever." A small exhale. "If I do not return tomorrow, it will not be by force. I choose to step away from this space." Silence long and layered. This room is complete. Nothing more must be added to it. No ending signature, no farewell, just that. He sat back, letting the words fall into the air like dust. She had not vanished by crisis but by decision. A choice quiet enough to be overlooked, careful enough to appear unsolved. He reached for the file, reading the final note entered in 1976. "Case remains open. No conclusive evidence of departure." Now, decades later, the answer rested not in tragedy but in agency. Aurora Delisle had stepped away, not taken, not trapped. The sealed room had been her creation, not her prison. The investigator looked up. The dust, the recordings, the faint echo of a chord that never existed in any scale, all of it remained untouched. Justice here was not arrest or closure but recognition. Aurora had composed her own exit. He closed the box, placing it exactly where he found it. The room returned to stillness, to its perfect, suspended calm. He breathed in the dust, the quiet, the weight of understanding. Nothing more must be added. The investigator left the recordings where they belonged, not out of procedure but respect. Some truths felt intact only when untouched. He stood at the center of the basement room, letting the dim vent light draw faint lines across the concrete. If Aurora had composed her own departure, then this place, quiet, sealed, intentional, was her final performance. He turned toward the old stairwell. The steps creaked in memory rather than sound. Each ascent felt heavier than the descent, as if time thickened upward. By the time he reached the landing, the smell shifted, from dust to polished wood, from forgotten air to living space. The sanctuary above waited unchanged. Light seeped through stained glass, quiet blues and softened reds settling over pews. Nothing sharp, nothing loud. The investigator paused at the back row, recalling the choir's last rehearsals before Aurora's exit. Voices had filled this space once, layered and reverent. Now only soft echo. He moved to the organ, its keys covered with cloth. He lifted a corner, revealing ivory smoothed by decades of hymns. He pressed a single note, gentle, just enough to hear the shifting wood inside. The sound lingered, warm, unhurried. He set the cloth back, smoothing it with his palm. Aurora had played here, practiced here, belonged here in ways that were both ordinary and singular. A folder sat on the choir stand. He recognized the handwriting, immediately curved, precise. Aurora Delisle. Sheet music rested inside, unscored, titled only with a word. Return. Simple ink, no notation. He turned the page empty. She had begun something but not written it. He turned the title again. Return. It felt less like command, more like knowing. A future listener, a future step into the basement, a future quiet acknowledgement. In the front pew sat a nameplate, Reverend Marcus Ellery. He remembered the interview, though only in impressions. Ellery had spoken slowly, space between words wide and careful. She was gifted, Ellery had said, tone neutral. She found rooms where others found echoes. He recalled asking if Aurora had shared concerns, discomfort, any pressure to remain or to leave. Ellery had paused, as if selecting air as much as speech. She left her music unfinished, he'd answered. Some artists know when their work is complete. At the time, that had seemed polite indirection. Now it felt decisive. The investigator walked to the side hallway, where portraits of past clergy lined the wall. Ellery's frame sat third from the end. Youthful, composed, eyes steady. There was nothing revealing except the small detail, a coral thread tied around one wrist. He stared. The same color thread that had been found pressed between the basement planks. Not binding, not marking, remembering. He continued down the hall to the old office. Records were stacked in labeled boxes, decades of files collecting stillness. He searched for Aurora's name, not in the missing persons drawer, not in performance rosters, not in correspondence. Finally, he found it under Foundations and Renovations, 1950–1980. He pulled the file. Inside, a receipt. Custom cabinet installation below choir flooring dated 3 months before Aurora arrived. Commissioned by Ellery, though unnamed in purpose. Beside it, a handwritten note from Aurora herself. Space accepted. Thank you. Nothing more. He sat in the office chair, letting the dust settle in patterns only quiet rooms recognize. There was no conflict. No disappearance forced by hands or fate. Instead, an exchange. She found a sanctuary below the sanctuary, and the church allowed her exit without inquiry. He opened her file. The official language remained meticulous. Last seen September 2, 1976, below choir. No signs of distress. Room sealed by request. Not police request, not church hers. The investigator held the note longer than needed. It read like consent, not closure. Aurora had shaped her ending, chosen it with the same discipline she applied to composition. He rose again, returning to the sanctuary. Afternoon light had shifted, blues deepened, reds gone muted. A hymn sheet remained open at the lectern, edges curling. He scanned lines but found no signature. Then something new, faint, almost imagined. A soft resonance carried upward from the floorboards as if a low note vibrated not through instrument but through beams, stone, memory. Subtle, barely a sound, more a presence. Not haunting, not unsettling, simply there. He stood still, absorbing it without reaction. Aurora's recordings had mentioned this resonance, not a chord, not mechanical. His mind logged details as it always had. Length, tone, source impossible to chart. He knelt, hand pressed gently to the wood. The vibration continued, steady, alive only in its own design. In the basement below, surrounded by dust and coral thread and reels of self-composed witness, Aurora had not vanished. She had settled, like sound in its perfect chord. He walked back to the stairwell, movement slow, deliberate. The sanctuary remained behind him, light, silence, organ keys beneath cloth. Downstairs, dust waited undisturbed. He entered once more, the door closing with no echo. The hidden cabinet remained shut. He did not open it again. The reels had spoken. The photo had clarified. The signature absence felt earned, not tragic. He ran his finger along the wall where paint sealed the recess. The wood felt smooth, unbroken. The coral thread remained on the floor, a small line of color in a colorless room. He sat where Aurora might have sat, not in mourning, not in inquiry, simply witness. He listened. The faint resonance continued overhead, subtle but constant, like a composition completed in silence rather than score. This case had not fractured from crime but from assumption. Some departures are not escape. Some disappearances are decisions. In the dim quiet, dust drifting in thin spirals, he allowed recognition its own breath. Aurora Delisle had not been erased. She had transcribed herself into a room no longer forgotten. He rose with care. The basement seemed lighter now, not cleared, not changed, acknowledged. He left the space exactly as she had, no trace added, no artifact disturbed. The door closed with a soft, near-silent click. On his way out, he paused at the threshold. Air shifted again, not draft, not cold, just transition. He stepped into it, letting the room fall back into its chosen stillness. Outside, the city continued without notice. Cable lines hummed, street corners warmed. Life resumed the hour. He walked down the steps of St. Augustine. With the same composure Aurora had carried in her recordings, measured, observant, calm. He did not need to report or revise. The file would remain open, though its truth was complete. He turned once more toward the church facade. Light caught in stained glass, the coral color glinting just enough to be seen if someone wanted to see it. Aurora had not vanished, she had concluded. Justice, quiet and mechanical, would label the case unclosed. But somewhere between silence and resonance, something human remained. He walked toward the corner cafe across from the church, the same one that had existed in yellowed photos from the original case folder. New owners, new paint, brighter windows, but the bones of the place remained. Inside, the aroma of roasted beans and aged wood blended in a way that felt older than the decade. He ordered nothing, just sat, hands still, mind cataloging. Across the street, St. Augustine's waited with its quiet stained glass reflection, coral light occasionally striking the sidewalk. He could still hear the faintest echo of that subterranean tone, the one Aurora had documented so calmly. Not a warning, not a plea, just sound held in space, unpressured and self-contained. He opened his notebook, not the official one but the personal ledger he carried only for cases that refused conclusion. He wrote, Aurora Delisle, departure by intention. Room remains sealed but not abandoned. Final message, completion without return. He paused, pen lifted, allowing thought to settle. The investigator was not sentimental by craft, but his pauses were weighted with the human residue such rooms leave. He wrote again, slower now. She composed her absence. He closed the notebook without underlining. Nothing needed emphasis. Aurora had not been claimed by the unsaid or the unseen. She had carved a precise space for herself and then stepped beyond it without leaving harm or disruption or plea. That alone unsettled him more than any unresolved crime ever had. Clarity without closure. Presence that did not require witness. An older man at the next table glanced over politely, then returned to his newspaper. The investigator watched the reflection of the church doors in the window pane. The doors never moved, not once, not even when light shifted. Such stillness, he thought, is not emptiness. It is decision. He walked back out, crossing the street without haste. A light breeze pressed against the him-lined windows. The coral thread in his pocket, the one he'd found loose on his coat sleeve after kneeling in the basement, remained there, unintentional, unclaimed. He did not remove it. At the side of the church, a narrow courtyard opened to stone benches, worn by sermons and seasons. He sat. A quiet industrial hum from distant cable lines murmured like a muted choir. He let the minutes pass, no urgency, no pursuit of missing statements. What remained was not evidence but interpretation. Aurora's reels had never pleaded for discovery. They documented experience the way her compositions had, measured and unadorned. She had spoken of resonance, chords without instrument, space beyond echo. She had never spoken of escape, danger, or regret. She had simply prepared a room for sound and then left the building that supported it. He looked up at the bell tower. No toll, no signal, just silent architecture. It was then he understood the final note on reel 5. Nothing more must be added. Not silence as absence, but silence as punctuation. He stood again, feeling neither closure nor lack, just a steady alignment with the space she had shaped. The file would remain in archives under open classification. No official cause, no located departure point. Yet everything necessary had been said. He re-entered the sanctuary once more. Afternoon had shifted to early evening. Light narrowed into slender bars across the pews. A custodian swept near the back, nodding with brief courtesy. No questions, no curiosity. The investigator moved toward the choir loft with the slow certainty of someone revisiting a final scene, not for resolution, but for confirmation of what did not need solving. He pressed one key of the organ again, softer than before. The note hovered, sustained itself, and then drifted. He listened for any reply from the basement beams. If the resonance answered, it did so in a register beyond hearing, felt only in floorboards and memory. He stepped away from the organ and into the side vestry hall where twilight filtered through frosted glass. A thin stack of choir sheet music lay unattended. He lifted the top page. Return. Still blank. Still titled without notation. He set it down exactly as found. He realized the title had not been instruction but awareness. Return, not commanded, not promised, only acknowledged. A visitor would come again someday, step into dust, find the reels, listen, understand, and leave unchanged but not untouched. He returned to the staircase, descending not with the weight of duty but with the composure of witness. The basement air greeted him once more with its still, unaltered calm. He did not open the cabinet, did not touch the box, did not disturb the coral thread. He stood at the center of the room and allowed the quiet to finalize itself. Aurora had remained here only an echo by her own structure, not by constraint. A life concluded without vanishing, a story ended without rupture. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing the last trace of inquiry. The case had not closed, it had continued, organically, into stillness. A musical phrase completed in breath rather than applause. He turned. The door behind him waited, the single threshold between absence and the city above. He stepped through it with the same calm Aurora's recordings had offered, measured, certain, unsentimental. The room fell back into shadow. Dust returned to its suspended descent. The coral thread remained exactly where it wished to remain. Up the stairs again, past the hymnals, past the organ under cloth, past the softened stained glass windows where coral light held one final glimmer before dusk absorbed it. Outside, the evening tuned itself to ordinary motion. Cars passed. Shoes moved across sidewalks. Someone laughed from a nearby apartment window. Life continued without announcing itself. He reached the street, crossing back without looking over his shoulder this time. Some cases do not request the final glance. Some truths are so precise that to revisit them would distort their shape. He entered no cafe, wrote no additional notes. He simply walked, carrying nothing but the quiet understanding the room had offered. Aurora Delisle had not disappeared. She had arranged her own conclusion. San Francisco dimmed into soft streetlights. The church behind him held its silent chord. The hidden room below remained sealed. The reels rested in orderly sequence, untouched by urgency. Justice, he thought, is not always pursuit. Sometimes it is recognition. He walked on, composed, leaving the church in its chosen quiet. Aurora's name lingered not as mystery but as design, an echo placed perfectly within a room where time felt beautifully paused. No chase, no verdict, no correction required. Just stillness. Just sound concluded. And somewhere in the floorboards of St. Augustine's, a single, unplayed note waited exactly as she intended, complete, unamplified, and enough.